I've spent my entire adult life making sure nobody could ever call my family gold diggers again. Which is a real shame, because 3 weeks ago, I accidentally became one. It started with a stranger's blood on my hands, and a grandfather old enough to remember when handshake debts still meant something, looking at me like I'd just won a prize I never entered for. "You saved my granddaughter's life," he said. "You'll marry her." I laughed. Actual out-loud laughter, the kind you can't take back once. It's out of your mouth. Nobody else in that hospital hallway laughed with me. I didn't know yet that in 6 weeks I'd be trying everything I could think of to get thrown out of that family, and every single attempt was about to make them love me more. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the boring part first. I deliver packages for a living, not a courier company with a nice logo, a guy with a beat-up scooter and a phone that dies if I use the Maps app for more than 20 minutes. That night I was 3 deliveries behind schedule, which in my line of work is the difference between rent and no rent. I wasn't looking for trouble. Trouble doesn't usually announce itself with a black car idling outside a parking garage with its headlights off. I noticed it anyway. 6 years of delivering to bad neighborhoods teaches you to notice things you'd rather not. At first it looked like nothing. A car parked wrong. 2 men leaning against it, not talking much, checking their phones like they were waiting for someone. Then a woman came out of the garage's side entrance, alone, heels sharp against the concrete, phone in one hand, completely unaware anyone was watching her at all. The 2 men straightened up. One of them said something quiet to the other. Neither of them moved toward their phones again. That's the exact moment the wrongness stopped being a feeling and became a fact. I want to tell you I didn't hesitate. That would be a lie. I stood there for 4 full seconds doing the math. I had exactly $40 in my account. I had a probationary review at work in 2 weeks. I had absolutely no business getting involved in whatever this was, and every practical reason in the world to keep walking. Then one of the men grabbed her arm, and the math stopped mattering. I didn't know yet that those 4 seconds of hesitation were the last calm thought I'd have for 6 weeks. I wish I could tell you I had a plan. What I had was a delivery bag full of someone's dry cleaning and enough adrenaline to swing it like it mattered. It connected. That surprised all 3 of us. The second man came at me from the side. I don't remember deciding to duck, my body just did it, the way you flinch from a hot stove. I remember the woman screaming for someone to call the police. I remember a fist landing somewhere near my ribs that I'd feel for a week. I remember the 2 men running when a security light finally kicked on, and I remember the concrete rising up to meet the side of my head. Then nothing, for a while. I woke up to the specific beige ceiling that every hospital in the world apparently orders from the same catalog. My ribs hurt, my head hurt more, and standing at the window, arms crossed, watching the city like it owed her money, was a woman who looked like she'd never once in her life allowed herself to be surprised by anything. She didn't rush over, she didn't cry with relief. She just turned, looked at me the way you'd look at a math problem that had somehow solved itself, and said, "You're awake." "Guess so," I said, because apparently getting hit in the head doesn't improve my one-liners. "You saved my life," she said, flat like she was reading it off a report. I didn't know yet that this particular icy calm was the most honest reaction anyone in her family was going to have to any of this. I found out her name was Mira Kalaway about 4 minutes before I found out her grandfather ran one of the largest holding companies in the country, and roughly 90 seconds before he walked into that hospital room like he owned the building, which it turned out he did. Augustus Calloway didn't ask if I was in pain. He looked at me, then at Mira, then back at me, and said the sentence that ruined my life. "You saved my granddaughter. Debts like that don't go unpaid in this family. You'll marry her." I laughed. Mira did not laugh. Nobody in that room found it as funny as I did. Here's the part I didn't say out loud in that hospital room, because saying it out loud is exactly the thing I've spent 11 years avoiding. 11 years ago, my father married into money. Not a fortune like the Calloways, just enough that when it fell apart, the tabloids had a field day deciding he'd planned the whole thing. Gold digger, con man. They used every word you'd expect. It didn't matter that none of it was true. It mattered that it was said, loudly, publicly, forever. I was young enough that the shame stuck to me too. Old enough to swear I would never once in my life let anyone say it about me. And now an old man was handing me exactly that story, gift-wrapped 6 weeks before I'd have to live in it. I could have said no. I want that on record. Mira offered me an easy exit twice before I ever agreed to anything, but refusing outright meant headlines of my own. The man who saved an heiress and ran from the reward, which somehow sounded worse than the alternative. So I did the only thing that made sense to a man who'd spent 11 years terrified of one specific sentence. I decided to become the sentence on purpose. Loud, obvious, undeniable. If I acted exactly like the gold digger everyone assumes a poor guy marrying into money must be, they'd throw me out themselves before the tabloids ever got the chance. I didn't know yet how badly that plan was about to fail. My first real dinner with the Callaways, I decided to be insufferable. I put my elbows on the antique table. I asked, loudly, how much the chandelier cost. I told Augustus his wine tasted like a Tuesday. I don't even know what that means. I made it up on the spot. The table went dead silent. I thought, finally, I've done it. Augustus laughed so hard he had to set down his glass. This one's got spine, he said, delighted like I'd passed some test I didn't know I was taking. Mira just watched me over her glass, one eyebrow raised, the exact look of someone doing long division in her head. Round 2. I decided to spend like the vulture everyone expected. I asked for an advance against the marriage settlement and put every cent of it into the first business I could find that looked like it was about to collapse. A dying noodle shop 2 blocks from my old apartment, because if I was going to lose money on purpose, at least it'd go somewhere real. 3 weeks later, that noodle shop had a line around the block because it turned out my old neighborhood had been starving for good cheap food and nobody with capital had noticed. The investment tripled. Augustus called it instinct. I called it, internally, a disaster. Mira didn't say anything about any of it for 2 weeks. She just watched. I caught her once, in the hallway outside the study, looking at me with something that wasn't suspicion exactly, more like recognition, like she'd met a lot of people performing sincerity her whole life. And here I was, bad performing the opposite. And it was the first honest feeling thing she'd seen in years. You're not very good at being awful, she said once, out of nowhere. I'm working on it, I said. Don't, she said, and walked off before I could figure out what that meant. I didn't know yet that she already knew exactly what I was doing and had decided not to say so, yet. Every family like this has one, and the Callaways was named Julian, Augustus's nephew, smooth-voiced, always a half step behind Mira in every conversation, like he was still doing math on what he'd lost when she was born instead of him. Julian shook my hand at that first dinner, like he was testing whether I'd break under pressure. Careful with this family, he told me quietly, smiling the whole time. Debts have a way of being called in early around here. I laughed it off. I didn't know yet that Julian understood something about debts I hadn't figured out yet, that he was the one who'd arranged for one to be owed in the first place. The company gala was my last real attempt. I showed up in a suit 2 sizes too flashy, made a toast that was somehow both too long and too crude, and knocked over an ice sculpture on purpose, hoping the story would write itself by morning. It did. Just not the way I planned. Someone filmed it, and the internet decided a rich family's future son-in-law being human and a little ridiculous at a stuffy gala was the most charming thing they'd seen all month. The Callaway Group stock ticked up 0.5% the next day on pure goodwill. Augustus framed a printout of the article. I stared at it in disbelief for a full minute. I found out 3 days later, from Mira, in a voice with no warmth left in it at all, that the attack outside that parking garage hadn't been random. Julian needed her removed from the succession, married off somewhere he could control, or gone entirely, because his own finances were quietly collapsing under debts he'd never told his uncle about. My showing up and ruining the outcome, then somehow becoming beloved instead of disposable, had turned his plan into something much worse for him. I didn't know yet that Julian's next move wasn't going to be subtle at all. 2 mornings later, my father's old scandal was back online. Every headline, every accusation, dug up and reposted with my name stapled to the top of it. Like father, like son, one of them said. Someone had made sure every reporter in the city had the story by breakfast. I knew exactly whose fingerprints were on it, even without proof yet. The thing I'd spent 11 years running from wasn't a story anymore. It was happening, in real time, with my actual name attached, in front of the exact family I'd been trying so hard to get thrown out by. I packed a bag that night, genuinely packed it, zipper and all, ready to disappear before the humiliation finished catching up to me the way it caught up to my father. I told myself I was doing the smart thing, the thing that protected everyone, the thing my father should have done 11 years ago instead of staying and letting the story eat him alive. I didn't get past the front hallway before Mira was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, blocking it. "You've been trying to get us to throw you out since the day you woke up in that hospital," she said. No preamble, no softness. I didn't answer, which was answer enough. I'm not stupid, Kai. The dinner, the noodle shop, the ice sculpture. That wasn't a man who doesn't know how to behave. That was a man performing exactly what everyone already assumed about his father, so he could control how it ended instead of waiting for it to happen to him again. I stood there with a packed bag in my hand and nowhere left to hide the truth. You're not your father's story, she said. You're just standing in the version of it you built yourself, out of fear, before anyone else could. I set the bag down. For 11 years I'd believed the only way to survive that story was to make sure it never got the chance to happen to me. Standing in that hallway, I understood for the first time that I'd built my own version of it anyway, just with better intentions and worse aim. I don't know how to do this without running. I told her honestly. Then don't run, she said. Fight it instead, properly this time, not by becoming the joke first. I called a meeting the next morning, not a confrontation exactly, just Augustus, Mira, Julian, and a folder of bank records Mira's people had quietly pulled overnight, showing exactly where Julian's debts had come from, and exactly which reporter had received a payment the same week my father's story resurfaced. Julian didn't shout or deny it dramatically. He just sat there, cornered, and said quietly that he'd never wanted to hurt anyone. He just couldn't watch everything he'd expected his whole life go to a girl who'd never had to fight for any of it, and then to a stranger who'd stumbled into it by accident. It wasn't an excuse, but it was human, and somehow that made it worse to hear than if he'd just been cruel for no reason at all. Julian left the company quietly within the week. No headlines, no scandal of his own. Augustus made sure of that, in the same old-world way he'd handed me a marriage debt in a hospital hallway. Some things in that family still got settled without ever reaching a newspaper. My father's old story got a footnote nobody asked me to write. A single interview, calm and plain, laying out what actually happened 11 years ago instead of what got assumed. It didn't erase anything. It just finally existed somewhere next to the lie instead of underneath it. Augustus found me on the terrace that evening, looking entirely too pleased with himself. Best decision I ever made in that hospital hallway, he said. You gambled my whole life on a debt I never asked for, I said. Best decisions usually look like that from the inside, he said, and walked off before I could argue. Mira found me a few minutes later. No performance left standing between either of us. Not hers, not mine. So, she said, still trying to get thrown out? No, I said. Turns out I just wanted someone to actually look at the whole story before deciding what it meant. 11 years of making sure nobody could ever call my family gold diggers again. And it turned out the only thing that ever actually protected me was letting one person see exactly why I was so afraid of the word in the first place. I never did get thrown out of that family. I stopped trying about the same week I stopped needing to.